Nice. So today we're going deep on a case that I think uh, really captured the attention of a lot of people.
Yeah.
The 2017 murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German in Delphi, Indiana.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got a really interesting set of sources here.
Yeah.
Articles from the Guardian, Wikipedia people, and the Independent.
Wow.
And so, we've got a lot to cover here. And I think our mission today is to sort of
Right.
go beyond just the basic timeline
Sorry.
and really unpack,
Oh.
all the twists and turns of the investigation.
Yeah.
The trial itself was really interesting. And
Right, yeah.
and then kind of what's happened since then and really just understand like how did we get from this total mystery
Right.
to actually having a conviction.
Yeah. And I think, what really strikes you about this case is that 5-year period
Yes.
where there's just no information.
Yeah.
And so, that really fueled a lot of public interest. And as you said, Libby German's presence of mind
Right.
in those final moments.
Yeah.
That audio that she captured and that image.
Yeah.
That really became, central to the whole story.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so let's start by actually going back to that day, February 13, 2017.
Okay.
You've got these two young girls, 13-year-old Abigail Williams and her friend, 14-year-old Liberty German.
Right.
And they're at the Monon High Bridge Trail in Delphi, Indiana, just out for an afternoon.
Yeah, and what's interesting is if you look at the Wikipedia timeline,
Yeah.
you see that Libby actually posted a photo of Abby
Yeah.
on the bridge around 2:07 p.m.
Right.
It's just like this ordinary moment,
Right.
A snapshot of friendship
Yes.
that unknowingly becomes this like last visual record of them.
Right.
And it really, I think, underscores
Yeah.
how quickly things can change
Yeah. Absolutely.
from the ordinary to the unthinkable.
Yeah, so they were supposed to meet Libby's father later that afternoon, around 3:15.
Okay.
But they never showed up.
Yeah.
And the alarm was raised, and they were reported missing at 5:30.
Right.
Can you imagine just like the panic as those hours tick by?
Oh, it's the thing that every parent dreads, and
Yeah.
and it is chilling to note that
Yeah.
as Wikipedia details, the families actually started searching themselves
Right.
before they even contacted law enforcement.
Wow.
And initially, the authorities didn't suspect foul play,
Yeah.
which, in retrospect,
Right.
really
Oh, yeah.
highlights how unexpected this was and
Yeah.
how brutal this crime was.
Absolutely. So then the following day around noon,
Yeah.
just this devastating news that their bodies had been discovered
Right.
about a half-mile east of the bridge near Deer Creek.
Yeah.
And the Independent reported at the time that the initial press releases didn't even specify the cause of death.
Right.
So
Yeah.
there's just this cloud of uncertainty hanging over everything.
Yeah. That discovery obviously shifts the whole focus.
Right. Well, of course.
It immediately becomes a homicide investigation.
Right.
And I think even though they're not publicly stating the cause of death,
Yeah.
the authorities must have realized pretty quickly just how serious this was.
Yeah, absolutely. And the investigation that followed was anything but straightforward.
Right.
One of the, I think the earliest and most prominent pieces of evidence
Yeah.
was this grainy photograph of a guy who was seen on the bridge around the time the girls disappeared.
Yeah.
And he almost immediately became known as Bridge Guy.
Right.
And it's amazing how quickly this image,
Yeah.
even though it's so unclear,
Right.
became just central to this whole investigation.
Yeah.
What do you think the investigators, what kind of challenges do you think they faced with
Well-
such limited visual information?
I mean, a grainy image like that doesn't give you a lot to go on
Right,
in terms of actually identifying somebody.
right.
So I think, they would have relied heavily on things like forensic techniques, trying to enhance the image.
Right.
Probably comparing it against,
Yeah.
any local databases they had of individuals
Yeah.
with, prior offenses.
Right.
And really importantly, just appealing to the public.
Right.
Hoping that somebody somewhere would recognize something,
Yeah.
even the smallest detail
Right.
from that image.
Yeah. And then a few days later,
Yeah.
as Wikipedia reminds us, the police released this audio recording,
Right.
which is just so haunting.
Yeah.
And it's Libby who captured
Yeah.
it's this muffled voicing down the hill. And,
Yeah.
and Libby's foresight in recording this
It's remarkable.
is just incredible.
It really is.
How significant do you think that recording ultimately was in
Well-
the investigation, especially considering, it took years for an arrest?
I mean, it's pivotal, right? Because it provides this direct link
Yeah.
to the perpetrator's voice at
Right.
the scene.
Right.
And, it gives the investigators something. that goes beyond just eyewitness testimony,
Yeah.
which can be unreliable.
Sure.
So even though they don't have a clear visual,
Right.
they have this voice print that they can start to compare against
Right.
potential suspects.
Right.
And I think, it's also a reminder
Yeah.
that even young victims
Yeah.
can inadvertently become key witnesses
Right.
through their actions.
Right. It's true.
And it also raises some ethical questions, I think,
Yeah.
about, where's the line between respecting privacy
Right.
and the potential for evidence
Yeah.
in a case like this.
Absolutely. And the officials at the time, as the Guardian noted, they praised her bravery.
Roughly so.
And the initial reward for information
Yeah.
was a significant $41,000.
Yeah. I mean, that really signals
Yeah.
how urgent this was.
Yeah.
Right from the beginning.
Right.
They recognized the need to get information
Yeah.
from the public.
Absolutely. So as the investigation continued,
Yeah.
we see the release of not one, but two composite sketches.
Right.
The first in 2017 and a revised one in 2019.
Yeah.
The fact that they released a second sketch 2 years later suggests that...
Well, it shows that the investigation's evolving.
Right.
Things are changing.
Right.
What do you think might have prompted
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
updated image?
Yeah. What would cause them to do that?
Well, I think usually when they release a second sketch,
Yeah.
it means they've gotten new information,
Okay.
or they've kind of refined their understanding
Right.
of what the suspect looks like.
Okay.
Maybe based on additional witness interviews
Right.
or even, forensic analysis of the
Sure.
existing evidence.
Yeah.
And it suggests that maybe that initial sketch
Right.
wasn't quite right.
Right.
And they're trying to give the public a more
Yeah.
accurate picture.
Yeah. And the 2019 sketch, as Wikipedia points out,
Right.
came with this shift in the investigators' public statements.
Yeah.
They were suggesting now that the suspect might be hiding in plain sight
Right.
and was almost certainly familiar with the Delphi area.
Right.
That adds a whole other unsettling layer to
And
this.
it does because it implies a local connection,
Yeah.
someone who's part of the community.
Right.
And I think that kind of statement is meant to really focus attention
Yeah.
within that local community.
Yeah.
They're basically saying, this isn't some outsider
Right.
who came in and left.
Yeah.
This is somebody who's integrated into Delphi.
Right.
And it really, I think, increases the impact
Yes.
and encourages people to think, maybe I saw something.
Right.
Maybe I know something.
Yeah. And there was also this plea for information
Yeah.
about an abandoned vehicle that was mentioned in the Wikipedia timeline.
Yeah.
A car that was left near the former child services office
Mhm.
on the day of the murders,
Yeah.
between noon and 5 p.m.
Right.
It seems like the investigators were really exploring every possible lead here.
Oh, yeah. An abandoned vehicle like that
Yeah,
is a big deal.
right,
It could suggest that the perpetrator switched vehicles,
right,
or was picked up by somebody else, or was trying to get away from that area.
right,
So they would have been trying to figure out
Yeah.
who owns this car,
right.
what's its history,
Yeah,
does it have any connection to potential suspects?
yeah. So let's fast forward now 5 long years
Okay.
to September 2022.
Yeah.
And this is where we see this incredible breakthrough.
Right.
A volunteer clerk who was reviewing old case files
Yeah.
discovered a misfiled tip
Oh, wow.
from 2017
Okay.
concerning a Richard Allen,
Okay.
and his last name had been recorded incorrectly. So the tip had been marked as cleared.
Wow.
This seems like a huge oversight.
It really does.
What does it tell us about just the challenges of managing?
Well, I think it underscores just the sheer volume of information that
Yeah.
comes in during
Yeah.
these big investigations.
Right.
Human error is always a factor.
Sure.
And in a case like this,
Yeah.
where there's so much public interest,
Right.
the tips just come pouring in.
Yeah.
So just, it highlights the need for really strong
Yes.
data management systems
Yeah.
and protocols to make sure that nothing gets overlooked.
Right.
And in this case,
Yeah.
this rediscovered tip becomes absolutely key.
Yes. So in that misfiled tip, Richard Allen had actually self-reported being on the trails that day.
Wow.
And he even said that he had seen Abigail and Liberty.
Yeah, I mean, that immediately raises red flags, right?
Of course.
You've got somebody placing themselves at the scene at the time,
At the time.
acknowledging contact with the victims.
Yeah.
So even though he wasn't considered a suspect at first,
Right.
this is going to make him a
Yeah.
person of interest.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
And about a month after the rediscovery of that tip,
Yeah.
on October 26, 2022,
Okay.
Richard Allen was arrested.
Right.
And he was charged with 2 counts of murder.
Yeah.
And as we know, he pleaded not guilty.
Yeah.
This must have just sent shockwaves through the community.
I mean, after 5 years of nothing,
Yeah.
this is a huge development. It
Yeah.
gives a sense that there's progress.
Yes.
Um,
Finally.
yeah, finally.
It's a movement.
No.
So when the probable cause affidavit was unsealed
Yeah.
in November 2022,
Oh, yeah.
it revealed some really compelling details
Okay.
that had led to Allen's arrest.
Okay.
It mentions the video footage from Libby's phone.
Right.
And we hear one of the girls mentioning gun
Right.
and then a man ordering them down the hill.
Yeah.
And the investigators believe that this is Richard Allen's voice.
Wow. So that audio that the public had only heard a snippet of
Right.
suddenly takes on this
Yeah.
whole new meaning.
Yeah.
And that detail about the gun,
Yeah.
it really escalates
Well,
the
that's-
sense of threat
Yes.
that's captured in that recording.
Right.
And it directly links the person giving the command.
Yeah. And then there's this unspent .40 caliber round
Right.
that was found near the girls' bodies.
Yeah. That's a critical piece of evidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the ballistics analysis later confirmed
Yeah.
that round had been fired from a gun
Right.
that Richard Allen had owned since 2001.
Right.
And both he and his knife
Yeah.
confirmed that he was the only one who had access to it.
Right. So ballistics, for people who don't know,
Yeah.
it's basically they're examining these microscopic markings
Right.
that are left on a bullet casing
Right.
by the firing pin and other parts of the gun.
Right.
And so the fact that those markings on the recovered bullet
Right.
matched Allen's gun,
Yeah.
that's a huge physical link
Absolutely.
between him and the crime scene.
It's a direct link.
Yeah, absolutely. The affidavit also included witness accounts.
Right.
One witness reported seeing a man in a blue jacket and jeans
Right.
who appeared muddy and bloody walking away from the bridge.
Wow.
Another witness and a tip mentioned a car parked oddly
Right.
in a way that suggested somebody was trying to hide the license plate.
Right.
And this description matched Richard Allen's vehicle from 2017.
Yeah. So those accounts start to build this circumstantial case.
Yeah.
They're placing someone who looks like Allen
Right.
at the scene,
Right.
potentially in distress,
Right.
and with a vehicle that's acting suspiciously.
Yeah.
And it all lines up with the timeline of the murders.
Right. And then there's Richard Allen's own statements to the police, which
Yeah.
seem to have some inconsistencies
Right.
about, his presence on the trail and what he was wearing that day.
Yeah, and those inconsistencies,
Yeah.
when you've got somebody who's putting themselves
Yeah.
at the crime scene,
Right.
are naturally going to raise some suspicion
Of course.
with the investigators.
Okay, so let's move to the trial itself,
Okay.
which started on October 18, 2024 in Delphi.
Right.
The prosecution presented this really disturbing case.
Yeah.
They alleged that both girls had had their throats cut.
Right.
And the details of how the bodies were found, as
Mhm.
reported in court documents and by the Independent, really harrowing.
Yeah.
Abby was found clothed in Libby's clothing,
Right.
and Libby was found nude
Yeah.
with tree branches arranged on her body.
Right.
Abby also had branches arranged on her body.
So the fact that Abby was wearing Libby's clothes
Yeah.
suggests
Yeah.
that there was some sort of manipulation after they were killed.
Yeah, and these details are so disturbing. And they suggest this deliberate act,
Right.
not just, in the taking of their lives,
Yeah.
but in the way that their bodies were left.
Right. And that arrangement of the branches,
Yeah.
it could be interpreted in different ways.
Right.
But its significance remains open to speculation
Yeah.
without more information.
Right. And the unspent bullet that was linked to Allen's gun,
Yeah.
that remained central to the prosecution's case.
Right.
But perhaps the most striking aspect of their argument was
Yeah.
the claim that Richard Allen had actually confessed to the murders over 60 times
60 times.
while he was incarcerated.
Wow, that's a huge number.
Yeah, that's an incredible number.
Yeah. And these confessions were reportedly made
Yeah.
to all sorts of people.
Yeah.
His wife, his mother,
Yeah.
other family members,
Yeah.
other inmates,
Hmm.
prison staff.
Yeah.
And so the prosecution argued
Right.
that this pattern of repeated admissions
Yeah.
really indicated guilt.
Yeah. And a state trooper also testified that after reviewing hundreds of Allen's prison phone calls, he believed that the voice of Bridge Guy
Right.
matched Allen's. So the defense, as you can imagine, mounted this vigorous counter-argument.
Yeah.
They asserted that Richard Allen was innocent.
Right.
They claimed that the investigation had been flawed from the beginning.
Okay.
And that crucial pieces of evidence had been overlooked or even destroyed.
Okay.
And they also maintained that Allen was not present on the trail
Right.
at the same time as Abby and Libby.
Yeah. The defense also brought up this unusual theory.
Yes.
This idea of a ritualistic sacrifice by Odinists,
Right.
which is a contemporary pagan religion with roots in Norse mythology.
Okay.
And they claimed that there were, quote-unquote, Odinism signatures present at the crime scene, specifically pointing to how the branches were arranged on the girls' bodies.
Right.
Why do you think they brought this up?
Well, they argued that the specific way those branches were placed, on and around the bodies, mirrored certain symbolic practices within Odinism.
Okay.
And that suggested the possibility of a ritualistic killing.
Okay.
But the judge ultimately deemed this theory inadmissible because there wasn't any credible evidence to link any known Odinists to the crime scene.
Right.
Or any concrete proof that those branch arrangements were actually specific Odinist symbols. So just conjecture without factual basis wasn't enough to present it to the jury.
Okay.
The defense also placed a lot of emphasis on Richard Allen's mental state.
Right.
They presented testimony that he had developed this serious mental illness and a grave disability during his time in prison, which coincided with when he was making these alleged confessions.
Yeah.
And a prison psychologist even testified about Allen's claim that he had initially intended to commit sexual assault, but then killed the girls out of fear.
Wow. So you've got this really disturbing,
complex picture, a man who's facing these serious mental health challenges while also being accused of these horrific crimes.
Yeah. So after the jury deliberated on November 11, 2024, Richard Allen was found guilty on all 4 counts of murder.
Wow.
And then on December 2024, Judge Fran Gall sentenced him to the maximum 130 years in prison.
Wow.
65 years for each murder to be served consecutively.
Right.
And she called the case most heinous.
Yeah.
And it's worth noting that 2 federal murder charges were actually vocated at the sentencing stage because of double jeopardy.
Right. Can you explain what that means?
Double jeopardy is this legal principle that basically prevents an individual from being tried twice for the same crime.
Right.
So in this case, because Allen was already convicted of the state-level murder charges, they couldn't pursue
separate federal murder charges for the same actions. So it was the culmination of this long journey for the families in the community. But even after the conviction and sentencing, there have been some unexpected developments. A new, longer video purportedly showing more of the interaction between the girls and Bridge Guy was released by people claiming to be Allen's supporters. And this new video, as people reported, seems to offer a more extended look at those final moments. You can hear more of the back and forth between Abby and Libby. Libby mentions something about no path going there, and then that chilling command guys down the hill. But it's important to note that Richard Allen's appellate lawyer has said that they have no connection to the website where this video was released, and they're not in possession of the video themselves. Which raises questions about, where it came from and whether it's even authentic. But it just highlights that there's still scrutiny and debate surrounding this case.
It adds another layer to an already incredibly complex and tragic case.
Yeah, absolutely. But amidst all this darkness, we've also seen these incredible displays of unity and resilience within the Delphi community. Even back in 2017, people across central Indiana were displaying orange lights to remember Abby and Libby and to signify their commitment to finding the killer.
It's a really powerful image of the solidarity.
And the efforts to create lasting memorials are really heartwarming. the plans for the Abby and Libby Memorial Park in Delphi are moving forward. Thanks to the Elena Park Foundation.
Right.
And they even received an NBA All-Star 2021 Legacy Grant. And the Delphi Community Middle School Library, where Abby and Libby were students, has been renamed the Abby and Libby Memorial Library.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a testament to how deeply these losses were felt.
Yes.
And the community's commitment to keeping their memory alive.
Yeah. So as we conclude this deep dive into the Delphi murders, what are the key takeaways for you?
Well, I think, for me, it's that intricate web of circumstances that ultimately led to Richard Allen's conviction.
Right.
You've got the initial mystery, the crucial role of Libby's recordings in providing that link to the crime. You've got the hard work of the investigators over so many years.
Right.
The accidental rediscovery of that tip.
Right.
The physical evidence with the bullet in the gun. The witness accounts. The alleged confessions. And it's a case that really highlights the dedication of law enforcement.
Right.
And the fact that even the smallest details can be important in solving these complex crimes.
Absolutely. And the emergence of that new video definitely leaves us with some lingering questions.
It does.
And it highlights that even after a conviction,
right,
the search for answers can continue. And the defense's attempt to introduce that Odinism theory, while it was unsuccessful, serves as a reminder that, there are a lot of different avenues that can be explored in these high-profile cases.
Yeah, and I think this case really underscores the importance of community.
Yes.
The way that Delphi came together to support the families and the persistence of law enforcement. Over those 5 years really led to some kind of resolution. And it makes us think about the nature of justice. The paths that we take to get there. The evidence that shapes the outcome. And the memory of the victims. That fuels that pursuit of answers.
Absolutely.
Well said.
Thanks. Appreciate it.